My music has always been preoccupied with revealing personal truth through constant attempts at understanding my past and the world around me to make sense of my present. I started my musical life as a pandero player in my mother's womb in Puerto Rico, a small island in the Caribbean Sea filled with beautiful, luscious landscapes and rooted in an incredibly rich culture and deeply complex political reality. It's been almost 15 years since I decided to leave my home and move to New York in search of something else. And every day through the distance, I find myself constantly trying to reconnect to the landscapes, people, sounds, colors, and textures I miss the most in the only way I know how to, through my music. You just heard excerpts from a piece titled Estela, which is a living soundscape inspired by the botanical illustrations of Chilean artist Andrea Wolf, which she digitally manipulates with a pixel sorting algorithm. The piece incorporates field recordings from Bosque Toro Negro in Ciales, Puerto Rico, with found sounds controlled by the MIDI sprout, which translates plants' biorhythms into music. By connecting two electrodes to the leaves of a small plant, new rhythms and melodic gestures are generated by detecting the slight electrical variations in the plant, which are then translated to MIDI data and mapped to sounds from my kitchen, including coffee beans and metal pots and pans. With this process, I intend to activate and make audible the secret life of plants to evoke distant landscapes connected to personal memories of places and spaces that are far away from me. I use found sounds, toys, and objects in my music as a way to highlight the sometimes overlooked magic and the ostensibly insignificant, the mundane, and the quotidian. I'm also really drawn to the many possibilities of manipulating and transforming these sounds that surround us and bringing them to new spaces to create new meanings. In my search for demystifying the performance of electronic music and making it more alive and engaging, I've been exploring unconventional instruments like this small interface called ototo, which turns anything that conducts electricity into a musical instrument. I connect alligator clips to plants, vegetables, and water to trigger sounds I have mapped on my computer. I like to build my new instruments in connection to the colors, textures, and sounds I perceive in the music, and add another visual layer to the music that can awaken new associations and images. Sometimes I write music that I perform myself, but oftentimes I'm writing music for others. I love writing for many different instruments and for voices, as well as finding ways to bring my unconventional electronic instruments into those pieces as well. I was the first composer in residence at the New York Botanical Garden, where I had the chance to work on my most ambitious project to date, a newly composed, site-specific work for 100 voices, electronic soundscapes, and mechanical instruments titled Chorus of the Forest, to be performed in the Thane family forest. The performance of Chorus of the Forest consisted of 6 musical vignettes that were composed and designed to be explored in any order and from any direction. Audiences experienced the piece as they walked through the forest and encountered different choral ensembles, custom-made robotic instruments, and soundscapes that were in part generated from the sounds of the forest being activated via MIDI Sprout, which uses electrodes to monitor the plant's biofeedback, translating that into musical values.
Awaken like the dormant tree, sprout like the berry seed, sprout like the berry seed. Awaken like the dormant tree, rise like the river, rise like the river. When it rains, when it rains, when it rains, when it rains, when it rains. When it rains, when it comforts me with her leaves blown. She showers my front yard with heartbeat, with heartbeat, with heartbeat petals. She's part of my home. She's part of my home. She was the last thing I saw. She was the last thing I saw. She was the last thing I saw.
Thinking beyond the concert hall has given me a new perspective on the possibilities of more installation-based work that lives out in the world and that could reach a lot more people outside of the usual concert goers. Reimagining the performance space is also something that has taken on new meaning during this difficult time of social isolation we find ourselves in. Early on during the quarantine, Kronos Quartet approached me with the idea to write a new piece for them to perform together via video conference platform. They wanted something that would not aim to recreate the live experience of a performance in the before times, but rather something that reimagined the performance space and fully embraced the medium as a new performance platform. My response was a piece titled Marejada, which takes into consideration the limitations of the video communications platforms and uses those challenges as compositional material and creative impulse. This piece is also inspired by the pixelated landscapes of my friend, artist Justin Favela, and by the desire to escape to a place that feels and sounds like home. The desire to escape is not always helpful and can sometimes lead to a romantic and somewhat removed ideal of what home is. Home certainly has a different sound and meaning to someone that's been away from it for a long time. In my music, I try to be hyper aware of this and find ways to dig deeper into the diaspora experience and the complexities surrounding it. The last thing I want to do is perpetuate unrealistic, limited, and problematic narratives that portray Puerto Rico as merely a paradise meant for others to enjoy, and that ignore centuries of oppression and colonialism that have affected us and that continue to impact the lives of those who still live there. As a Puerto Rican living outside of the island and navigating mostly white-centered spaces, I'm often questioning my place in them and trying to find ways that disrupt expectations of representation of Latinidad.
Let's listen to unique Caribbean music from Antigua. Its melody out of sawed-off steel drums, an oil drum serenade.
What happens when we start to perform our identity for others? For convincing others we're interesting and worthy enough to deserve a seat at the table. What does that mean for a Puerto Rican composer like me who's been told many times that my music doesn't sound Puerto Rican or that I don't look Puerto Rican? In 2018, I was commissioned by Banganakan's People's Commissioning Fund to write a new piece for the Banganakan All-Stars to be performed at the Ecstatic Music Festival at Merking Hall in New York. I responded with a piece titled Turistas, which was in part a response to these comments from others, sometimes meant as a qualitative observation, a compliment, or a criticism. In this piece, I sample early reggaeton beats, and I incorporate salsa clave as well as a sample from an Afro-Puerto Rican bomba from Sesame Street, refracting my identity through the prism of humor and exploring intrinsic components that make up my identity, while at the same time unveiling the absurdity of stereotypes. This piece was written soon after Hurricane Maria made landfall in Puerto Rico in 2017. And I was very interested in and inspired by how young artists on the island were exploring humor as a form of resistance and survival during these difficult times. Around that time, I discovered the work of Puerto Rican illustrator and brilliant writer Mariela Pavón and her scene Turistas. Here's an excerpt from Turistas, performed live by the Banganakan All-Stars at the Ecstatic Music Festival, and accompanied by Mariela's quotidian vignettes, which compile real commentaries, doubts, and inquiries made by customers while she worked at a small hotel in Old San Juan. Recently, I was able to collaborate with Mariela on another project as part of this year's Prototype Festival. For this new piece titled Otra Cosa, we were inspired by conversations between the two of us and singer Lido Pimienta. This discussion centered around our shared personal experiences as Latinas living in the diaspora and back home. It is influenced as much by proto-reggaeton as it is by the Latin American penchant for melodrama, informed by the most intimate and heartfelt over-the-top Spanish ballads the three of us grew up with.
Moniana, Mariela, Mariah, Mariela, Mariana, Mariela, Maria,
Angélica, 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 Angie, Angélica, Angela,
Lido, Pimienta.
Collaboration is an essential part of my creative process and one of my favorite things to do. I love collaborating with artists from other art forms as well as other musicians like my friends in our band Balloon. The band started in Puerto Rico in the early 2000s and has been a really important part of my musical DNA. From the resilient DIY spirit that I developed playing many shows in the underground scene in San Juan, to my love of experimental pop and combining electronics with folk instruments, Balloon has deeply shaped the way I think about sound and collaboration. My string arrangements might make their way into Balloon songs, and the band's playful and tropical rhythms might infiltrate into an orchestral piece or a percussion quartet I'm writing. The less I think about separating these parts of my musical life, the more liberated I feel as a composer, and the more I believe my truest self is the place in which all of these can comfortably coexist. The robotic modules with various objects placed on top that you see in my live solo performances or with Balloon also make their way into pieces I write for others, like the following piece I wrote for my friends of So Percussion titled Gone. In this piece, I used Nick Yolman's Bricolo surface poppers, which are solenoid-powered noisemakers on which different inanimate objects are placed to create fast, erratic, and incisive rhythms. These four modular music devices operate as a ghost-like presence, sometimes interacting with the members of So, and sometimes having a mind of their own. Inspired by things and people that have left us, Gone explores the visceral physical feeling of emptiness and the absence, while at the same time searching for connections and meaning in those things and people that are left. Whether I'm writing for plants, voices, orchestras, robots, string quartets, vegetables, chamber ensembles, or found objects, one thing I feel strongly about is to commit to creating honest work that unapologetically occupies spaces in which access has been historically limited for people who look like me. And to continue to dig deep, to be open, to be vulnerable, to try, to fail, and to imagine the world as it could be.